X-Men Apocalypse is the newest film in the franchise, and it stars James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Oscar Isaac, and many, many others. When Apocalypse, the first ever mutant, awakens in 1983, he gathers 4 new followers in an attempt to take over the world. It is then up to the X-Men to stop him. And just in case you haven't seen the movie yet, this review is spoiler-free, and I'm planning on doing a spoiled-filled review sometime early next week. Now, I was really excited for this movie. I'm a pretty big fan of this franchise. I mean, not big enough to own a t-shirt, but hey, I mean, Deadpool's close enough. And I actually rewatched every single X-Men and Wolverine movie before seeing this one, and yeah, Last Stand and Origins were pretty tough to watch. But I've never been this prepared for a review ever. I actually really enjoyed this movie. Yeah, it has its flaws, and it's definitely the weakest of the trilogy, but I mean, it's up against First Class and Days of Future Past, both awesome movies, so saying it's the worst isn't really that bad. And Fassbender was incredible, once again as Magneto, and I loved his character arc and development and found it really touching. And McAvoy, of course, was great too as Professor X, and I really liked the subplot that they had with him. But I found his character could have been more developed, but we'll talk about that later. And we of course have to talk about the new cast that was introduced in this movie, and I really didn't know what to expect from them, but they killed it! In particular, I was so happy that Nightcrawler was back and thought Smith-McPhee did a great job as his character, and he was so freaking funny. Sheridan was also great as Cyclops, and I really liked seeing his character's origin and also the beginnings of his relationship with Jean Grey. And speaking of Jean Grey, I thought Sophie Turner arguably had the toughest role to pull off, especially when you consider how great Famke Janssen was as this character. And I thought she nailed it. She really got the character and all the emotion that comes with her. I also really like that, similar to First Class, these mutants were at the height of their game in the original trilogy, but in this movie you get to see when they are first accepting and learning their powers. It's just really cool to see a new side of these characters. And Quicksilver, they somehow managed to top the scene in Days of Future Past. This one was awesome. And he's also in it more, which I really like because I love Evan Peters as this character. And I also really enjoyed the action in this movie, especially in the last act. And there is one scene in particular I won't spoil for you if you have not seen the trailer yet, but it was so freaking cool. Finally, Singer did something that I would consider kind of risky because in the final act, there are some mind-bending stuff that happens. Like physical battles happening in one's mind, and I can see how that would turn some people off, but I loved it. I found it really elevated that scene. And unfortunately, one of my biggest negatives with this movie is the villain Apocalypse, and it's not Isaac's portrayal. I thought he was pretty good as a character, and I know there was some controversy as how he looks, but I thought he looked pretty cool. His motivation is kind of spotty at times, and the way that he gets his motivation, And when you really think about what he is doing and how they execute it, he's a pretty cliched villain. Just in general wasn't developed really well, and I'm not saying that he needed more screen time because he had enough, it's just the way in which they utilized him could have been so much better. And even though you got to see all of his incredible powers, you just never fully felt them. And from everything I had heard about this villain, and with a name like Apocalypse, he just did not meet the expectations. And Jennifer Lawrence, I'm not saying she phoned this one in, she was pretty good at times, but some of her line deliveries, oh man, just terrible. And it just, to me, felt like she had already checked out of this movie before it began. Another thing that really got on my nerves about this character is she is hardly ever Mystique. Whenever they had the chance to have her as Raven, she is Raven, even though she is doing things that Mystique should be doing. And they tried to do a half-ass explanation for it in the movie, but no, we know the only reason why they're doing this is because she's Jennifer Lawrence and she's a big deal right now. And I'm not blaming this all on Jennifer Lawrence because also her character was barely developed in this movie. And the more I think about it, the more it really pisses me off because the way in which they played her character, her arc could have been so freaking powerful. And had they done it, maybe she would have tried harder. And I had the same issue with Professor X. Aside from that subplot that I talked about, his character is barely developed too. And in fact, out of all the old cast members, Magneto's the only one that gets proper development in this movie. And look, I understand they had to introduce all these new casts in this movie, but at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that this one has a lot less depth when you compare it to the other two movies in the trilogy. There are also some pacing issues with this movie. It clocks in at 2.5 hours, and it does drag at times, especially in the first act. They're jumping around in all these different locations, and I found it really hard to get invested in the story. But then we get to a scene with Magneto in a forest, and it is freaking awesome. Overall, I enjoyed this movie. Yeah, I have some issues with it, and it may be the weakest of the trilogy, but it is so much better than Last Stand and Origins. So if you're a fan of this franchise, absolutely go check it out. I'm going to give X-Men Apocalypse a B. If you have seen the movie, let me know your spoiler-free thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, or you can just click right here to see more.